We are speaking with Pete Hegseth from Concerned Veterans for America, CV4A.org, here at the Defending the Dream Summit. And Pete, you were talking about we're from the government and we're here to help. And I think veterans have had that sort of experience an awful lot recently.
Aptly applied to the Department of Veterans Affairs. So yeah, I was on the panel this morning. We're from the government and we're here to help. And the VA is a perfect manifestation of that. Everyone has the best of intentions when it comes to veterans. Everyone wants to help them. And so they write bigger checks and feed a system as it exists, as opposed to so they put the government bureaucracy at the center, the VA, as opposed to the veteran at the center. And what we're trying to do is flip that discussion and say, if you're not trying to, it's not about just feeding the bureaucracy, it's about delivering timely and quality care to the veteran. Maybe the bureaucracy does that, maybe it doesn't. And maybe we should give the veteran the choice to decide where he or she should go to receive the best quality care. So I think the VA provides a great crystallization of government-wide issues that we face and reflexive ways in which Washington throws dollars at problems and feeds bureaucracies that are good at feeding themselves and feeding their own interests as opposed to delivering quality and timely care. So that's what we talked about and some of the reform efforts that are underway.
Now let me ask you this. Did you mention the fact that Sesame Street is a really great way to train VA employees?
It did not come up in the panel.
But
it should have. Yeah, no, I am Oscar the Grouch, by the way.
Yes.
And I think that was an incredible revelation. So the news recently that the Department of Veterans Affairs was using in a PowerPoint presentation Oscar the Grouch to characterize how veterans react to the VA. Well, veterans are, first of all, it's ridiculous. Second of all, if veterans react in a grouchy manner, it's because they're facing an impenetrable bureaucracy that won't respond to them, won't give them real answers, there's no transparency, and they have to wait in line for days, weeks, months to get the services that their country promised them. But it was stunning, and I don't do sort of outrage for the sake of outrage, faux outrage. And so the PowerPoint is what it is. One individual created it, but it's indicative of the way the VA, in many ways, as a bureaucracy, looks at veterans. They're the problems. They're the parasite. If only the veterans were more agreeable and less dependent, we would actually get things done. In reality, they should be seeing that veteran as a customer, as someone they're competing for, trying to give the best customer service to. And you're aware of customer service. You understand how important it is.
Exactly.
Bureaucracies don't do it well, and veterans respond in kind.
And it's about having the veteran at the center of the care rather than the bureaucracy. And this is the problem that you have. You mentioned they should be competing for that veterans business. There is no competition in the VA. And the reform that we're seeing promises a limited form of access to competitive...
Limited,
very limited. And it's limited by the same mechanism that was at the center of the fraud at the VA. So it's a little difficult to be really confident in this reform that's coming around, isn't it?
Correct. So we were advocates of this reform. We believe in, and what it did is two key things: brings accountability and choice to the VA. The one thing we really love about the legislation is it allows the secretary to actually fire underperforming managers.
Right. Big
shocker. People, Sharon Hellman, the director of the Phoenix VA, still not fired, still on paid leave right now, basically a paid vacation, even though we know what she did with secret lists and lying. You know, they can't fire her because of the bureaucracy. This bill allows the secretary to do that. She's immediately unpaid, short review process. That's a good thing. The choice aspect, as you said, only if you live further than 40 miles or you're waiting longer than 30 days. But who gets to decide if you're waiting longer than 30 days? The VA, the same VA that was lying to you about how long you were waiting before. So we are clear-eyed about the complications with this reform. And it's part of the reason why we're coming back in 2015 with a much more robust agenda as far as putting the veteran at the center. Why do we think so highly of ourselves and of bureaucrats that we can't give a veteran a choice to decide where they're going to go? A, it empowers the veteran to find the best care they can, and B, like you said, it comes down to basic principles. It comes down to competition. If you are competing, are there other blogs out there trying to talk about conservative issues?
No, because we've outlawed all the other blogs.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
You do this because you love it and you believe in it, but also because you know that if you're not doing it, somebody else is going to do it and fill that space. You're aggressive about it. Competition matters. The VA has never had to compete, and because it doesn't, it gets lazy and doesn't innovate, doesn't respond to the needs of veterans, and then no one's held accountable because there's no response or feedback mechanism. It's competition and accountability that are central. And that's where our group, Concerned Vets for America, is going to go with reforms. And very aggressive. This is a great start. We like the bill as a first step. if we're going to put the vets at the center, then you have to look at some fundamentally different ways of doing business, and that's part of what we're trying to advance.
Pete, I'd like to change the subject a little bit and talk to you about the rising threats in Iraq and Syria. This is where you and a lot of your fellow veterans had fought in these fronts, and the lack of clear strategy in dealing with this. I mean, Barack Obama got a lot of flack a couple days ago over the fact that he's admitting that there was no strategy yet to deal with ISIS. This is not a new threat. And I really would like to get your perspective on it, personal perspective.
Sure.
And obviously, I don't know, not necessarily representing the Concerned Veterans for America, but,
sure.
but Pete Hegseth.
We talk about these things, and myself personally. Rule number one, if you don't have a strategy, probably not a good idea to tell the enemy that you don't have one.
Right.
I mean, it's basic stuff. It is also unacceptable and inexcusable that 3 years into the Syrian conflict, we haven't determined what our best option is. Now, the best option was to act decisively initially when you identified the threat back in 2012. And we can have that conversation. But today, now, we've known about the uncertainty in Syria, which has really fed the ISIS threat. I mean, they fostered in Syria and then it moved into Iraq. We've also known through intelligence services that the metamorphosis of Al-Qaeda in Iraq to ISIS into Iraq has been gathering for months. And we've known this, and yet he stands at a podium and says, we don't have a strategy to deal with ISIS. I think there are, his Secretary of State, his Secretary of Defense, his Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, I think they're chomping at the bit to do something about this because they understand the nature of this enemy. I think you've got, what was George Bush? He called himself the decider.
The decider-in-chief.
The decider-in-chief. We kind of need a decider-in-chief right now, someone that will make a decision and act decisively. The world, whether he likes it or not, the world still looks to America to set the tone of how we address these threats. It doesn't mean we have to nation build. It doesn't mean we have to be there for 10 years with hundreds of thousands of boots on the ground. But if we believe it is a serious threat, then we have to have a clear-eyed perspective of how to confront it. I happen to think it's going to take some investment and commitment to defeat, but right now they can't seem to make that decision.
And the Washington Post editorial board this morning, or late last night, talked about the fact that Obama is basically countering things that are being said by his cabinet secretaries. Chuck Hagel called it an imminent threat. John Kerry said it was an imminent threat.
You have to crush it. Yes.
You have to crush it. Attorney General Eric Holder, not necessarily known for his neocon perspective, said it may be the most profound threat that he's ever seen in his career. And yet, at the same time, or immediately after these, you had Obama at the podium saying, well, this is not an imminent threat to the United States. And yesterday he was saying, the world's always been a messy place, but we just hear about it more because it's on social media. I mean, in the Washington Post editorial board said, what can our allies be thinking if Obama is contradicting things that his own cabinet secretaries are telling him about this threat?
And he likes to talk about how he fosters a team of rivals and this open conversation about what about when every single member of your cabinet is singing the same tune about what needs to happen and you're still not willing to act? I think it's a four-letter word problem for the president. It's Iraq. He can't see past that four-letter word that he was invested in ending, finishing, done, washing his hands of as early as 2002 when he sort of staked his national claim on being against the war, and then the speech in 2004 and then his candidacy. He can't get outside the box of we're not supposed to be there. This is a bad war. Regardless of how you feel about the nexus of the war, today we face a threat that is different than anything else the world has ever seen. And so he wants to live in the world as he wants it to be, as opposed to the world as is. And as a veteran who's walked the ground and seen Islamists and confronted this, you can't negotiate with them, you can't placate them, you can't form a government in Baghdad. He called it a sophisticated government they're going to build in Baghdad. You don't build a sophisticated government and then start to deal with an enemy. He has it all backwards. It is military momentum that creates the opportunity for diplomatic progress. Politicians are lagging indicators here in the United States and across the world. When they see things tipping, they respond accordingly. That's why Maliki in 2007 and 2008 took on the Shia militias as a Shia himself, because he saw the environment as such that he could do that. You're not going to create that environment without tipping the scales, and some pinprick strikes, which is what his Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense have told him are not sufficient, are not going to change that. So he's wedded committed to an ideology. He's sticking to it while the world is on fire around him. And I think there's a lot of people in that White House, in the Pentagon, and the State Department that are head-desking it right now, just saying, when is he going to wake up? And America suffers as a result.
Pete Hegseth, Concerned Veterans for America, thanks for doing the interview with us today, and good luck to you.
Thanks, Ed. Good to be here.